Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical. This is our third episode, and by we, I mean this is me and journalist Tony Ortega getting together every week on my channel to discuss the events and stories of the last week in Scientology, what Tony has been reporting on, and me bringing some of my collected wisdom to, with some thoughts and ideas about coercive control and psychology and all of that. First, real fast, we named this show Straight Up and Vertical. And those words, just for people who don't know, those words are straight out of David Miscavige's mouth. That's a Scientology mantra. And it means having a graph looking somewhat like what's behind me here, where it's just straight up and vertical. And it's supposed to be a measure of how Scientology is taking off and taking over the world with all of these straight up statistics. And the only statistic these guys have going right now that resembles anything like that is square footage of real estate. That's all they got, right? So that's the title. It's just to clarify what the title of the show is. So, hey, Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I had a little surprise for everybody this week.
Yeah, big time. We got this Rolling Stone story on Valerie Haney. Tell us the scoop. Tell us what's up with this.
Well, people, that watch our videos and read our stories and watch Leah Remini's show, Scientology in the Aftermath, are probably very well familiar with Valerie Haney and the fact that she was the star of the third season. They told her story to premiere the third season of Leah's show. And what a story. I mean, the fact that she grew up in Scientology, she had worked in the private quarters of David Miscavige and Shelley Miscavige. She had been a casting agent out at Cine at the Gold Base and was finally sick and tired and wanted to get out of there and knew that the particular video they were shooting was probably going to be the last one they shot out there for a long time. And she knew it was her only chance. She crawled into the trunk of the car of an actor, not a Scientologist, just a hired actor that was there at the base so she could escape. It's got to be probably one of the top 2 or 3 amazing escapes from Scientology of all time.
Big time.
So naturally, that's why Leah made a big deal about it. And then the aftermath of that was that she went to work for Leah for several years. She doesn't today, but she's working for another producer now. But she was working with Leah, and they were stalking her and surveilling her and libeling her, putting all this stuff about her on the internet. So not too long after the show, she then filed a lawsuit against Church of Scientology in 2019. And it has just been really rough going for her because Scientology convinced a judge that contract she signed obliged her not to sue and that she would have to go to arbitration. And her attorneys have spent the last 2 years fighting that decision. And now they've been trying to actually go through some of the steps of this farcical arbitration. And she's been nominating people like Elizabeth Moss and Tom Cruise to be her arbitrator.
That's right.
And lo and behold, one of the people she nominated most recently said yes. We don't know who yet. And so Scientology has put together an arbitrating panel, and it's basically out of the court's hands. So now Valerie agreed to give me her first on-the-record interview since she filed her lawsuit in 2019. Because I'm sure, like me, you were wondering, well, how does she feel about that arbitration thing? What has it been like for her? Why did she pick the name she did? Tom Cruise, Shelley Miscavige, Jenna Elfman, and that kind of thing. And so I was really fortunate she decided to tell me those things. And that's in today's Rolling Stone. Got a nice sizable piece with some of her reactions about all that. And I have to say, I mean, some of them I was expecting. Of course, she was appalled that the court would force her into arbitration and basically force her to go crawling back to her abusers.
Yeah.
She's angry about that. And her quotes are great. But there are some things, Chris, I have to say that I was a little surprised. I was really curious, for example, how she came up with the names that she did.
Yes. That's what I loved about. Yeah.
Yeah. So she went through them with me. And this was really interesting because some of them she was, because in court, the Church of Scientology was saying, she was in Scientology for many years. She knows who's in good standing, but she's been out for 6 or 7 years. You never know who's in good standing, right?
That's right.
So she literally said she picked names like Giovanni Ribisi and Rebecca Minkoff because they came up in Google searches, and she figured they're probably in good standing. But others she had a personal connection to.
Exactly.
And that was really interesting. She had gotten to she obviously worked closely with Shelley Miscavige, the vanished wife of the leader of Scientology, David Miscavige. She knew her really well, so she chose her. And she knew Tom Cruise. She was waiting on Tom Cruise, just like she was on the Miscaviges.
That's right.
And I expect, yes, I think there was a level of it being a stunt for publicity, and she admitted that part of it was about publicity. But what really surprised me, Chris, was she chose some of these people because she seems to believe they would have some sympathy for her.
Exactly. She even
wasn't that surprising?
It was, but it made total sense once she broke it down. Shelley, especially, because she mentioned working for them for years. This wasn't like she was around them for a couple days or a couple weeks. They knew her. She knew them. Also, Elizabeth Moss, great reasoning on that one. There's some good points that she makes.
Well, like one that really surprised me, and I know most people won't pay attention to it because it's not a big name, but one that really surprised me was Jessica Fetchback. Now Jessica Fetchback was married to Tommy Davis at one time, and when Tommy and Jessica were married, they were two of the spokespeople for the church. They worked in the department that dealt with the media. Yeah. And Tommy was on camera. He was kind of the main spokesman for Scientology. Mike Rinder too, but really Tommy was the one that went on camera, if you remember.
That's right.
And Jessica also dealt with media. In particular, Jessica's role was Katie Holmes' handler. And you can still find magazine stories today where they're talking about every time a reporter would ask Katie a question, Jessica would answer it.
Yes.
I mean, it was that was how weird it was.
That's right.
So that's who Jessica Fetchback is, and she and Tommy left soon after in 2011, and then they split up. But Valerie said something really surprising. She said that when she knew Jessica, they would talk about how bad things were and how bad the abuses were. So in other words, Valerie's motivation for putting Jessica Fetchback on that list was not just to maybe embarrass Tommy Davis in some way, I don't know, but because she really thinks that, Jessica knows what's going on. Jessica knows how bad it is, and maybe she might even have some sympathy for her on this arbitrating panel. I found that really interesting because it tells me that, Valerie hasn't given up hope that she could go in there and really convince some people that she's been harmed.
Exactly. And we, knowing the process, of course, and knowing what's come before and knowing how things work myself internally in Scientology, it actually, I'll just say, it doesn't really even matter who the arbitrators are because it's all going to be funneled through another individual who's going to approve it. And that person is taking orders directly from the top, and it's going to go the way that person wants it to go, not necessarily the way those arbiters do. But everything.
And tell them who that person is, Chris.
Well, of course, we're talking about the International Justice Chief, right? And that's, I believe we still have that as Mike Ellis. Who knows if he's been replaced? And yes, and I knew him, sort of from a distance, but I definitely was familiar with that man. That's how long he's been doing that work. And that goes through RTC. There is not one of these things that doesn't. And that means David Miscavige's hands are directly or could easily directly be on it. And certainly with something this high profile, he's going to be all over this. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why we know that this is already a foregone conclusion if we understand how the system actually works in that group. There's nothing fair about it.
Right. And let me just real quick, I know it's so confusing for people when Scientologists do any kind of service in the church, from the communication course to the OT levels to going to work for Scientology, any kind of contact with the Church of Scientology, they are asked to sign a contract.
Yep.
And they don't ever look at it. They don't ever read it. They just sign it, right? And on that contract contains an arbitration clause, which says if you have any kind of problem with the Church of Scientology, you will not sue us. You promise to come to our internal religious arbitration instead.
That's right.
And when Valerie left, and she escaped in the trunk of a car, but then she was talked into going back to route out properly. And she spent 3 months at Pac Base being interrogated, and then she finally was allowed to go, but only after she signed this exit agreement, which contained an arbitration clause. So what happens when somebody like Valerie sues is that the church goes into court and says, look, judge, they signed these contracts. The contracts oblige them not to sue us. They have to go through our brand of internal arbitration. And let me make sure people understand, the judge at that point, all the judge can do is decide if the contract is valid or not valid. They literally cannot say, well, how are you going to treat her once she gets there?
Right.
What are you going to do? What's your process? They cannot examine Scientology's policies because it's a church. And the court cannot rule over church rules. And so, again, all the judge can do is decide, is this valid or is it not? And in Valerie's case, the judge decide, yep, she signed that contract. It's valid. You cannot sue in this court. You have to go to their arbitration. Then once it's outside of that, once it's in Scientology's court, the judge literally cannot do anything about the conditions. I know everybody's asking, oh, under California law, she's allowed to have an attorney in arbitration. No, this is Scientology's arbitration, not independent arbitration. Scientology sets all the rules.
Right.
So that's what's so crazy. And that's when I got some great responses from her in this article. I wanted to know, how does she feel about that? And of course, she's disgusted. She's appalled. She can't believe she's being made to go through this. And I really, really feel for her. Big time.
Absolutely. I have two points on it. One, of course, being that, as she herself mentions, this is simply and objectively re-traumatizing a victim. There's no other way to describe this entire process for her in this context. And it's really unspeakable. It really is gross that this is being allowed to happen. And the circumstances of this case and Valerie's situation, escaping in the trunk of a car, having to sign those contracts under duress because, one, she said she felt, quite depressed. And two, there was no way she was getting out of there if she didn't sign those things. At least as
she said she had a 24-hour guard.
Yep.
That would even go to the bathroom with her.
Yep.
She was never going to leave that place until she went through the interrogations and signed that document. Scientology denies it, but she says there was an armed guard right outside the door.
Exactly.
She knew she was never going to leave there unless she signed that thing. So, and then of course with Scientology, they make a big deal about the fact that in the videotaped signing, they asked her, now, you're happy with Scientology? Oh, yes. And working for David Miscavige? Oh, he was amazing. She said all those things, but just like Debbie Cook before her, Valerie is saying, I would have said anything to get out of that room.
Exactly.
So
is it really any different from what we saw all the way back in the Korean War, right? With these videotapes of not video, but these camera recordings, these live TV shows of downed POWs glorifying the Chinese or glorifying the Koreans. It's the same thing. And this is where that coercive control element really is missing from our understanding of how this stuff works. The other thing,
well, and course, I also want to point out, just to get you a little more SEO, Chris, to get a little more search help here. She talked about Tom Cruise, and she had revealed some things that I had never heard. For example, the way she first met Katie was after Tom revealed to Miscavige, his best buddy, that he was dating Katie Holmes. Dave took out like the most expensive suite at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas.
That's right.
And Valerie describes the scene where she and Dave and Shelley were introduced to Katie Holmes for the first time at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And then they all went out and Valerie had to stay behind and basically clean all the rooms. But I'd never heard that before, that this great meeting between Katie Holmes and Scientology's leader. happened in Vegas at Caesar's Palace.
Right. And all paid for on church funds, tax exempt
Oh, of
money.
course.
Right. All of it.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenditure of church funds. And was any parishioner of Scientology who was, you know, throwing their money at Miscavige aware of this? Absolutely not. They think their money's going toward illiteracy programs and drug counseling and, you know, fourth dynamic programs. It's the most ludicrous thing.
Right.
It's just fraud. And this is another example of it. I wanted to say that for myself, you know, having sat in probably the same room Valerie did, to be honest, in security pack, leaving Scientology myself, that I can definitely speak from personal experience to the illegitimacy of those contracts. There is no other word for it but duress. You know, when you're leaving, you will say or do whatever you have to, and you know you have got to put a smile on your face.
What would happen, Chris, if you said to them, I will sign it, but first I'd like to have my attorney go over it?
Oh, that would have been the subject of more sec checking, right? Oh, really? Yeah, come right this way. Your auditor is waiting for you. You know, I mean, that absolutely. There was been no quarter given of any kind on any of that. I was not, I didn't have the right to remain silent, and I did not have the right to an attorney. Okay. Let's put it that way. So, yeah, it was absolutely a duressful situation. And I am very concerned at this point, rightly or wrongly. I'm no legal ego. I don't understand the whole process, but I do know enough to know that what's happening right now to Valerie and what's happening, you know, fingers crossed on this Florida case, that this does not become, you know, a precedent, that this does not become like this is how it happens for every single ex-member who tries to go after Scientology for their criminal behavior towards those ex-members. And
well, this arbitration strategy derailed the Garcia case. The arbitration strategy derailed this case with Valerie. It failed in the Masterson civil lawsuit because those appeals judges realized that all of the abuse that's being alleged, like the poisoning of the pets of these poor women, happened after they had left the church. Now, Valerie's is a little funny because some of the things she's alleging happened while she was in the Sea Org, and some things happened when she was out and working with Leah Remini. And no judge yet in that case has wrestled with that at all. So the best thing, and then there's the Baxter case. We don't know which way that's going to go. This labor trafficking case in Florida, in Tampa, Florida, that is also being, you know, we're waiting for a decision for a judge on arbitration. So all Valerie can do at this point, and she, you know, says she's going to have to do it. She knows she's going to have to do it. She's got to go through this kangaroo court arbitration with Scientology, then come back to the judge. They won't have a transcript. They won't let her have a transcript. She won't have an attorney there. She's just going to have to put together an affidavit describing what she went through, I guess.
Yeah. And
then come back to the judge and say, look, judge, in the interest of justice, you cannot accept this arbitration. I'm sure they'll award her some token amount, right?
Yep.
I'm sure this panel, and we don't know and again, we don't know the names of any of the three arbitrators yet, but we will eventually. I have a feeling they will give her some token amount, just like they did with the Garcias. She's going to go to that judge and say, Judge, this was a farce. In the interest of justice, do not accept this award, and let's get the lawsuit going again. That's the only thing she can do now. And when the Garcias tried it, the judge said, no, I'll accept it. And he accepted the arbitration result, and in the 11th Circuit upheld it. So, you know, it's Scientology is definitely in the driver's seat in this case. And I think that's why Valerie was willing to come and forward and do an on-the-record interview, because who's she gonna make angry? Church Scientology?
Exactly.
Like, she cares.
What does she have to lose at this point?
She's a fighter. You can see it. You can see it in the story.
Big time. Oh, and like I said last week, the courage present here it's really impressive. It's admirable. It really is. She's amazing. Let's go to the second thing. You reported this week on, okay, so we've had an incredible and noticeable increase in fair gaming tactics, let's say, right? Social media on and off. from Scientology in the last few months. It's been like, whoa, what's going on? Clearly something has changed in terms of how they've decided to engage in attack. And all they do is attack. Right. That's the policy. Attack, never defend, always attack. So want to tell us what happened this week.
So Granberry, back in Valerie's case again, he really stepped up his involvement in her case. And that made Scientology very, very angry. They don't like Granberry. I think part of the reason is Granberry's so effective against them, especially in the last several years. He's found a way to really help people get their money back from Scientology, and he's been doing a great job. And they were just really unhappy that he has been helping Valerie more than he was before. And so all of a sudden, Graham said he realized he was the target of a noisy investigation. And as you know, Chris, what Hubbard described as noisy investigation is it's when they want to what they want to do is they want to creep you out. They want to make you paranoid. What they do is they have an investigator interview all kinds of people that you know, but without calling you, so that you just keep hearing it from people saying, "Hey, I got a call from a guy, somebody you haven't worked with in 10 years." You'll get I got a call from a guy asking questions about you. That's what Hubbard wants. He wants it to trickle back to you, so it makes you feel awful. And they do that to me all the time. And Granberry said on Facebook, this is happening to me now. I'm hearing from people that I'm the target of this. And he mentioned a name, that the people that were being called by a guy named John Blosser. Mm-hmm. Well, my eyes really lit up, because I maybe should have said something about this guy earlier, but a couple of years ago, I was his target, and he was calling up people that knew me. I mean, people that I haven't worked with in 20 years. And I found out that he's got an interesting story. Like Jim Lynch before him, John Blosser was a legitimate journalist at one time, if you consider National Enquirer legitimate journalism. But he was a National Enquirer reporter who wrote a story about a friend of Philip Seymour Hoffman, who supposedly gave an on-the-record interview about Hoffman's drug death. Mm. And it turned out that the story was completely false. And it seems like what happened was Blosser and or his partner on the story interviewed somebody thinking it was Hoffman's friend, and apparently it wasn't. Mm. And so Hoffman's friend was so upset and sued the Enquirer for $50 million.
Damn.
And my understanding was there was a very large settlement of some kind. I don't know the amount, but Blosser no longer worked for the Enquirer. So, like Jim Lynch before him, we've got a journalist who's maybe on the downward slide on their career, and there's the Church of Scientology. Can't wait to employ them. I assume the money for Scientology is really good. So he was targeting me for a while. Then he was targeting Mike and Leah. In particular, not only he was again, noisy investigation. He wasn't calling Mike. He wasn't calling Leah. He was calling people who had, not just people who had worked on Scientology in the aftermath, but the family members of people who had worked on Scientology in the aftermath. I mean, just classic Scientology creep behavior that's supposed to get everyone freaked out. And now he was calling up people that knew Granberry. And if you remember, I first wrote about Granberry in 1999. And back then he was the target of a really elaborate operation by Scientology. Graham's a gay guy. And, what Scientology is one of the most homophobic organizations there is. And so what they did was they got this disgraced former LAPD cop to pretend he was working on a sex crime investigation of Granberry, and going around asking people if they knew about things, indiscretions he was guilty of because he was gay. Just disgusting, absolutely disgusting. That's what they were doing in 1999. Well, now in 2023, this guy Blosser is calling Granberry's friends, asking them if they've ever felt sexually threatened around him.
Oh my God.
So it's the same thing 24 years later.
Right.
That's Scientology's playbook. So once Graham went ahead and put Blosser's name in a court document, at that point I thought, I should have named this guy a couple of years ago. I regret that I didn't. So finally, I figured it was time to put up his picture, put out his name. If you are called by John Blosser, you are being called by the Church of Scientology. So I just hope people get to hear that message.
Big time, big time. And that story was hard hitting enough. And I was like, God damn, yeah, let's get the name and number, right? But then out comes this other PI story that also posted this week out of this is a follow through on an earlier story of stalking of Leah that had happened out in New York. Is that right?
That's right. It's kind of a complex story, but there's this really sordid lawsuit out on Long Island. And it's tangential to what we're interested in, Chris. But the point is this former NYPD detective is accused of being a hired private investigator who was hired to follow a woman, again, just surveil her for her husband, keep an eye on her. And instead, he ended up not only socializing with her, but the allegation is he raped her in the back of his car one night.
Yeah.
So there's been and here's the crazy thing. He videoed it. He videoed the sexual act on his own phone and then tried to keep the footage out of the court. He was eventually found in civil and criminal contempt of court for trying to hide that footage. And he was on the hook for more than $300,000. So I've been keeping an eye on him because it also turns out in that course of that lawsuit, they got his phone and they got his texts and they got the texts of his buddies that he was working with.
Yep.
Actually, there's a whole thing about how his phone disappeared, but whatever. The point is they got his texts from the cloud. And it turns out not only was he doing this job for this firm IIG to follow this woman and he ended up allegedly raping her, but that they were also working for Scientology. And that they were following Leah Remini when she was filming the movie Second Act here in New York with her friend Jennifer Lopez. And we have them talking in text about stalking both Leah Remini and Jennifer Lopez. And then it turned out they were also investigating me because I was writing about it. So, that's why I naturally I have a personal interest in this case because this guy was hired to surveil me, investigate me on behalf of the Church of Scientology. And it turns out he's accused of raping a woman he was supposed to be spying on.
Like,
it's crazy. Just a crazy story, man.
Well, exactly. And of course, you connect these dots immediately because they're two different cases in literally different parts of America. What unites them? The employer, the Church of Scientology. And who are they employing? Disgraced journalist, PI, ex-cop, accused rapist? Like, what? What are we talking about here? Well, isn't it interesting that they can't stop calling you a failed journalist and they can't stop calling Leah a rape apologist?
Right, exactly.
What do you think is going on there? Right? I mean, if that's not psychological projection...
That's what it is, right? I mean, you know those terms better than I do, but that's what it is. It's like when you see Scientology accusing something of somebody of something, you can usually be sure they're guilty of it themselves. Exactly. And that's how they deal with it.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. And that's not a small point because they're really ramping up and have been for, and they have a long history, this decades of history. You wrote a whole book about Paulette Cooper and her whole fair gaming process back in the 70s, where they nearly drove her to suicide. Literally faked and created evidence of a bomb threat and sent it to the FBI. That's how ballsy they were. And you have to wonder, how many places have they firebombed? How many places, what are they covering up? I mean, this projection point is something that's been going on ever since Hubbard was around. Miscavige runs the same show using the same playbook and projecting the same awful onto people. And you just have to start questioning, what are you guys really up to? We talk about it being this authoritarian cult, this kind of criminal organization, but this projection point is very telling. It's not some guessy sort of thing we do in psychology. That's a thing. Well,
let me ask you something, Chris. I mean, when you were in the Sea Org, though, And I know there's this kind of can do, make it go right attitude in the Sea Org, and we're tough, and we're, it's actually a virtue to be kind of ruthless, and it's a weakness to be reasonable, right?
That's
All
right.
these ideas about that. So, but were you aware of these kinds of fair game activities, surveillance of enemies, use of private investigators, or was that something you didn't learn until you got out?
No, I have to say I knew of some of it. I knew about a layer of it. I was definitely aware of the fact that there were Scientologists, and I wasn't aware of outside contractors, of outside private investigators, but I was aware of Scientologists being used and hired by the Office of Special Affairs in order to do surveillance. That's as far as I knew. Okay. Going through people's trash, the stalking, the illegal activity where it starts crossing lines, I was not aware of. Now, that being said, I'm going to go out and say, had I been aware of it, there would have been a point or a degree where I would have been okay with it, right?
Yeah,
because the mindset is that these people are evil.
That was going to be my next question is, they're putting out all this stuff on social media, particularly about Leah, as you said, calling her a rapist apologist. They go after Tracy McManus a lot at the Tampa Bay Times. Yeah. Mike Rinder, of course. They a little less on me lately. Now that I say this, I'll probably ramp it up. Yashar Ali, they're always going after him. But I have to wonder, what about Scientologists who see that stuff? I mean, can't they sort of perceive that it's over the top, that it's kind of ridiculous, the things they accuse us of, or do they just eat it up?
No, they eat it up. It's a testament to another particular aspect of this, which is the bubble world. It's really hard to get it across to people because it's so insular. It's such a, I have to end up using words like fanatical to describe that, where I used to live and where these people live, where they're so tunnel vision that Leah and Mike are basically Satan on earth. They don't think that way, but, that kind of magnitude of evil, that anything it goes when it comes to taking them out, anything that's necessary. Right. And that's what they think of as command intention. And the whole point of the Sea Org is to make command intention reality. Right? I promise to uphold, forward, and carry out command intention. That's the first point of the Sea Org code. So.
And when you say that, it reminds me that when I was researching my book on Paulette, I managed to find a few former Scientologists that had taken part in some of the operations against her.
Yeah.
And of course, Len Zinberg is a great example. What a sweet guy he is. He apologized to her personally. He felt terrible that he took part. But there were other former Scientologists that had been out for a long time. And I asked them about, well, now that all this time has passed, what do you think about the operations you did against Paulette? And they would say, like, well, she deserved it. She was really a bad person.
That's it.
And that's how deep-seated these ideas are that they get pounded into their heads in Scientology, is that even after they've been out for decades, they still can't see that Scientology was lying about people.
That's right.
Incredible.
It is incredible. And it's a point of recovery from the whole process that they don't get to.
Yeah.
And I actually broke this down in my Q&A just yesterday. I mean, I went on a real roll about this and how people can get stuck. You have those 5 stages of grief. Well, they're really 5 stages of acceptance. And recovery has everything to do with that. And you get people who get stuck in the angry, and they just won't let it go. They can't get past it. And that's a real shame. It's a real shame for them. It's a shame for the fact that, they victimized people, and they just won't let themselves see that they were victimizers as well as being victims. And that counterplay is that it's a hard place to go, and it usually requires therapy, and not everybody goes there. So that's what happens. Ugh. Yeah, but worth commenting on over and over again, because there's always hope, right? There's always, you can always you can always flip the script. You can always go and get more help or get more education or learn more about this stuff. And by doing that, kind of come back more to your natural self and not that Scientology L. Ron Hubbard persona. You know, that's what the cult does. So, wow, what a week, huh?
What a week, and thank you, Rolling Stone, for paying attention to Valerie Haney. I'm glad she's getting some more attention, and wow, just think about what she's going to have to go through going back to Scientology that she escaped from, and walking in there by herself without an attorney. I mean, just insane.
I'm telling you, that is balls of steel. It's just, I would have a hard time doing that, and I understand these guys upside and one and down the other. And I would not want to have anything to do with that. So, again, major kudos to her for fighting this fight that has to be fought.
Yep.
All right, Tony, thanks very much for the show again this week. Look forward to next week. And hopefully, who knows where this article will go. Maybe some other media will pick it up. We'll see where things go.
Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. All right, folks out there, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming around. Please share, get this around on our, on our interwebs. And if you haven't subscribed to Tony's Substack, you can see it there on the screen. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, of course, do so. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.